Stop him. He stole my car. Those words cut through the calm of the lakeside morning like a siren, sharp and shrill enough to make birds scatter from the trees overhead. At first, I thought it was some random neighbor yelling at a passing stranger, maybe even kids playing a prank, but when I turned my head, I realized that finger, that shrieking voice, and that storm of fury was aimed directly at me. I hadn't even been in the neighborhood for a full hour, and somehow, I was already the villain in someone else's story. The woman running at me was one I'd already heard about from whispers online when I researched this place before moving in. Her name was Karen, and she wasn't just any neighbor. She was the infamous HOA president who made life miserable for anyone daring to set foot in this community without bowing to her rules. The wild part? I had expected her to show up eventually, but I never thought she'd launch her attack so quickly or in such a dramatic way. I had just parked my truck, still dusty from the highway, in front of the little cabin I was renting. The place wasn't much, but it had what I needed, a quiet spot by the lake, enough privacy to blend in, and most importantly, it was right in the middle of the HOA territory I'd been assigned to investigate. Because here's the part Karen didn't know, the part that made this moment feel surreal. I wasn't just some ordinary new neighbor unloading boxes from the back of my truck. I was Detective Harris, working undercover. My department had sent me here to look into shady property disputes and suspicious financial activity tied to the HOA board. The job was simple: live like a resident, keep my eyes open, gather evidence, and stay invisible until the time was right. But before I could even slide the first cardboard box out of the truck bed, here she came, screaming bloody murder as if I had just robbed her blind. "Don't let him get away. He stole my car," she screeched, waving her arms so wildly I thought she might trip over her own feet. She sprinted right into the middle of the street, blocking my truck like a barricade of pure rage. People in the surrounding houses started to notice. Doors cracked open, curtains twitched, and within seconds, a small crowd began to form. Neighbors peeked out with coffee mugs in hand, some recording on their phones, others muttering to each other in half-suppressed laughter. Everyone knew Karen, and from the looks on their faces, they'd seen this kind of performance before. The difference this time? She wasn't yelling at some teenager cutting across her lawn or a delivery driver parking too close to her curb. She was pointing at me, a stranger in her eyes, and declaring to anyone who would listen that I was a criminal. I climbed out of my truck slowly, raising my hands just enough to show I wasn't hiding anything. "Ma'am, this is my vehicle. I've got the title, the registration, the insurance, everything you'd want to see. There's been some mistake." But calming her wasn't an option. Karen's face twisted into something between triumph and fury. She looked like someone who had just caught a burglar red-handed. "Don't you dare lie to me. I know every car that comes through this neighborhood, and that is mine. You must have stolen it from my driveway. I'm calling the police." She yanked her phone from her pocket and punched in 911 faster than I'd ever seen someone dial. "Yes, officer," she yelled into the receiver loud enough for everyone within 100 yards to hear. "I've got him right here, the thief who stole my car. He's standing next to it, acting like it's his. Hurry before he drives away. Yes, yes, send someone fast, he's dangerous." Dangerous? I nearly laughed at that. If only she knew who she was talking about. If only she knew that the call she was making was going to bounce right back into the system I was part of. She thought she was setting the stage for her big heroic HOA moment, where she got to play the victim and call in the cavalry. But the reality was, she was already digging herself into a hole so deep that no HOA title, no lawyer, no loud screaming was going to get her out of it. The neighbors started muttering louder now. Some rolled their eyes, clearly tired of her antics. One man leaned over to his wife and whispered, "She's at it again. Third time this month she's accused someone of stealing something." The wife shook her head. "But a car? That's a new one." A group of teenagers down the street pulled out their phones, recording every second like it was live entertainment. For them, Karen's meltdowns were probably better than anything on television. Meanwhile, I leaned against my truck calmly, trying to project the kind of patience that wouldn't give away who I really was. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "when the officers arrive, they're going to ask for proof. I'll be happy to show them my ID, my registration, and anything else they need. But accusing someone of stealing a vehicle is serious. I hope you understand what that means." Her response? A high-pitched laugh that sounded almost manic. "Oh, I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is how you thought you could just drive into my neighborhood, take what belongs to me, and get away with it. Not on my watch." She puffed out her chest, glaring at the growing audience as if she expected applause for her courage. In that moment, I realized something. Karen wasn't just trying to scare me off. She wasn't even thinking about the truth. She was putting on a performance, one she had probably rehearsed 100 times in her head. She lived for this drama, thrived on it. Every second she was yelling, every neighbor's eye fixed on her, it gave her power. And in her mind, power was the same thing as being right. But what she didn't know was that she had just picked the wrong stage and the wrong actor to share it with. Within 10 minutes, I heard the wail of sirens cutting through the still morning air. 2 patrol cars rolled into the neighborhood, lights flashing across the lake houses like a scene ripped out of a TV drama. And there was Karen, standing in the middle of the street with her arms waving wildly like she was directing traffic at an accident scene. "Over here! Over here!" she screamed, her voice practically breaking with excitement. "That's him! That's the thief! Arrest him before he runs!" Both officers stepped out of their vehicles, hands resting on their holsters. They scanned the situation carefully, me standing calmly by my truck, Karen bouncing on her heels with hysteria written across her face, and about 20 neighbors gathered like it was some kind of neighborhood festival. Phones were out, cameras were rolling, and everyone was waiting for fireworks. Karen, of course, wanted nothing more than to see me in handcuffs. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," one officer ordered, his voice firm and professional. He didn't know me. He didn't know my cover. To him, I was just another man being accused of theft. I nodded, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. "No problem, officer. I'll cooperate fully. My ID's in my wallet, and my registration is in the glove box. You're welcome to check both." Karen jumped in before the officer could even respond. "Don't listen to him. He forged the papers, I'm telling you. He's dangerous. Look at how calm he's acting, just like a criminal mastermind who thinks he can talk his way out of anything." She jabbed her finger at me like I was public enemy number 1. The neighbors snickered quietly, clearly entertained. Some shook their heads as if they'd seen this show one too many times. A teenager in the back yelled, "World's worst detective, Karen," but she either didn't hear it or ignored it, too wrapped up in her performance. One of the officers stepped closer and held out his hand. "License and registration, please." Without hesitation, I pulled my wallet from my pocket, handed over my driver's license, and nodded toward the glove box. "You'll find the papers in there. Everything should match perfectly. I can also provide proof of purchase if necessary." The officer took my license, glanced at it, and then froze. His eyes lingered on the card a little longer than usual. He flicked his gaze back at me, then down at the badge tucked neatly behind my ID. Recognition dawned on his face like the sun breaking through clouds. His posture shifted immediately, straightening up with the kind of respect only another officer would understand. He didn't say anything yet, protocol dictated he keep things discreet, but I knew he had seen enough. Meanwhile, Karen was practically foaming at the mouth. "Why are you just standing there? Arrest him already. He's dangerous. You can't let him just stand there smirking at me." The second officer stepped forward now, curiosity in his eyes as his partner handed him my license. He studied it, glanced at me, and then cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to take a step back, please." Karen blinked at him, stunned. "What? No. Why are you protecting him? I'm the president of this HOA. That's my car. You need to do your job and put him in cuffs." The officer shook his head, his tone sharp. "Ma'am, we take false reports very seriously. You need to calm down and let us handle this." That word, false, hit Karen like a slap across the face. Her jaw dropped, her eyes went wide, and for a moment, she looked like she had no idea what was happening. Then, as quickly as the shock came, she snapped back into her act. "False? Are you kidding me? I know what I saw. That's my car. I'm not lying." I couldn't resist a small smile, just enough for her to notice. She spun on me, her face turning red. "Don't you dare smile at me, thief." The neighbors chuckled louder this time, and a few phones moved in closer to catch every expression. This wasn't just entertainment anymore, it was comedy. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was unraveling in front of her entire audience, and the cameras weren't going to be kind to her later. The officer holding my license finally spoke up, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I can assure you this man's identification checks out. His vehicle is registered in his name. There's no evidence of theft here." Karen's face flushed deeper. She sputtered like a car engine about to stall. "No, no, no. You don't understand. He doesn't belong here. He just moved in. He's suspicious. People like him shouldn't even be allowed in this neighborhood." That last line earned her a few gasps from the crowd. The prejudice dripping from her voice was obvious, and it wasn't lost on anyone. Neighbors exchanged uncomfortable looks, and a few even muttered under their breath, "There she goes again." At that moment, I decided to step in, my tone calm but edged with authority. "Ma'am, you've made a very serious accusation. You called the police and reported a felony that never happened. That's not just a misunderstanding, that's a crime." Her head whipped toward me, eyes narrowing. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that?" I reached into my wallet slowly, carefully, and pulled out the badge that had been tucked behind my license. Holding it up so both officers and the crowd could see, I said clearly, "Detective Harris. Undercover Division." The reaction was instantaneous. The officers straightened fully, nodding with respect. The neighbors gasped, phones zooming in on the badge to capture every detail. "And Karen?" Karen went pale. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. You're a cop." I nodded slowly. "That's right. And you just falsely accused an officer of stealing your car. That's not something you walk away from easily." The crowd erupted with murmurs, some laughing outright. A man near the front muttered, "Oh, she's done for now." Another neighbor chuckled. Finally, karma caught up to her. Karen shook her head frantically, trying to claw her way back from the hole she'd dug. No, this is a mistake. I didn't know. I thought, well, he looked suspicious. Yes, that's it. I was just trying to protect the community. I had no idea he was an officer. But nobody was buying it. Not the officers, not the neighbors, and certainly not me. Her entire performance, her self-righteous act, was collapsing in front of the very audience she had tried to impress. And for the first time, I could see it in her eyes, fear. The crowd was buzzing now, and you could feel the shift in energy like a storm breaking. Phones were out everywhere, recording Karen's meltdown from every possible angle. What had started as her attempt to humiliate me had flipped on its head. Now she was the spectacle, and her neighbors weren't about to miss a second of it. Her face was red with embarrassment, her voice cracked as she tried desperately to claw back control, but it was like watching someone try to patch a sinking boat with a single strip of tape. Fine. Fine, maybe it's his truck, she snapped suddenly, her tone sharp and defensive, her arms crossed like a child caught lying. She glanced around quickly, realizing she'd lost the crowd's support. But then, her brain scrambled for a new excuse, something to keep her performance alive. But he was speeding. That's right. He came barreling down the street, reckless driving in a family neighborhood. He could have killed someone. The officers glanced at each other, unimpressed. One of them even raised an eyebrow like he'd heard this song and dance before. I shook my head, my tone still calm, but this time there was no mistaking the amusement in my voice. Ma'am, I was going 15 miles an hour. You ran out into the street screaming before I even finished parking. If anyone was creating a hazard, it was you. The crowd laughed openly at that, some clapping, others shaking their heads. A man from across the street shouted, "She almost got hit herself running into traffic." The teenagers down the block were in stitches, doubling over with laughter as they kept recording every second. This wasn't just a neighborhood incident anymore, it was entertainment gold, and Karen was the unwilling star of her own comedy show. Karen's eyes darted between the officers, the neighbors, and me, desperation starting to seep into her expression. Her voice wavered now, less confident than before. You don't understand. I'm just trying to protect the community. That's my job as HOA president. If I don't call out suspicious behavior, who will? The first officer crossed his arms, his patience clearly thinning. Ma'am, accusing someone of a crime they didn't commit isn't protecting the community. It's wasting police resources and potentially endangering innocent people. You need to think very carefully about your actions. Karen gasped as though she'd been struck, her hand flying to her chest. Endangering? Me? I'm the victim here. You should be thanking me for being vigilant. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I stepped forward slightly, my badge glinting under the morning light, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Ma'am, your definition of vigilance is harassment. You tried to frame me, then when that didn't work, you accused me of reckless driving. That's not vigilance, it's a pattern of abuse. The neighbors erupted again, this time with claps and even a couple cheers. For years, many of them had probably suffered under Karen's reign of petty rules, endless fines, and ridiculous accusations. And now, in broad daylight, with cameras rolling, she was being exposed. It wasn't just me calling her out, it was her entire community silently, or not so silently, celebrating her downfall. Her eyes darted wildly. She pointed a shaking finger at me and shouted, "This is harassment. You're targeting me because I'm a woman, because I'm strong enough to stand up for this neighborhood." That excuse didn't land either. The crowd groaned, some rolling their eyes, others openly laughing now. A woman from the sidewalk called out, "Karen, you accused a cop of stealing your car. Stop playing the victim." That was the final nail in her coffin. The second officer stepped forward, his tone firm, almost commanding. "Ma'am, you need to stop talking before you dig yourself any deeper. Making false reports is a serious crime. Continuing to double down only makes things worse for you." I could see the panic building behind her eyes now. She knew she had lost. The audience she thrived on had turned against her, the police weren't buying her story, and the man she thought she could publicly humiliate had turned out to be the very thing she feared most, someone she couldn't control. Karen's shoulders sagged slightly, but she still tried one last desperate move. Her voice dropped from a scream to a hiss. You can't be undercover. You just moved in. That's impossible. You're lying. You're not really a cop." I held her gaze, calm and unflinching. "Ma'am, fairness, logic, and your approval don't determine the law. You wanted to expose me? Congratulations, you did. But in the process, you exposed yourself. And now everyone here sees exactly who you are. The neighbor's reaction was electric. People were laughing, shaking their heads, whispering things like, "She finally messed with the wrong person." One teenager shouted, "World's biggest L, Karen," drawing more laughter. It was like years of pent-up frustration with her came pouring out in the form of cheers for me. Karen, however, was unraveling before our eyes. Her breaths came quick and shallow, her face a storm of emotions, anger, embarrassment, panic. She muttered something about calling her lawyer, but it came out weak, unconvincing, almost pitiful. The image of her as the untouchable queen of the HOA was crumbling fast. I turned to the officers, my voice steady. "Gentlemen, I think you've seen enough. I'll document this incident in my report. I don't think pressing charges is necessary, yet. But if she continues this behavior, I'll make sure the department knows exactly what she's been up to." The first officer nodded respectfully. "Understood, Detective. We'll file the incident, and we'll be keeping an eye on future calls from this address." His subtle tone made it clear, they were tired of Karen too. Karen's lips trembled, her eyes watering just slightly, but she spun on her heel and barked, "This isn't over," before storming off toward her house. Her dramatic exit wasn't nearly as powerful as she wanted it to be, though, because the crowd was already laughing, mocking her, and, worst of all for her pride, still recording. As she disappeared into her house, one of the neighbors muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "I give it 24 hours before that video hits the internet." Another neighbor chuckled, "She'll be famous, just not the way she wants." I stood by my truck, watching the scene settle. The officers gave me nods of respect before heading back to their cars. The crowd began to disperse, but the laughter and whispers lingered like smoke after a fire. Karen had tried to paint me as the villain, the thief, the outsider who didn't belong. But in the end, she had exposed herself as exactly what she was, a bully who had finally picked a fight she couldn't win. The street slowly emptied out after Karen stormed back into her house, but the energy she left behind lingered like the smell of smoke after a fire. Neighbors walked back to their porches, still shaking their heads, still chuckling, still whispering to each other about what they'd just witnessed. For them, it was pure entertainment. For me, it was both a relief and a warning. My cover was still intact enough to keep my assignment going, but my quiet arrival in this neighborhood had just exploded into a scene no one would soon forget. The officers stayed back for a moment, speaking with me privately near my truck. Their tone had completely shifted from the caution they showed when they first arrived to the respect that comes from recognizing a fellow officer. "Detective Harris," one of them said, his voice low so the neighbors wouldn't overhear. "We'll file the incident under a false report. If she tries this again, let us know immediately. We've had run-ins with her before, but this..." He gestured toward Karen's house, "This is the worst stunt yet." I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not looking to escalate anything unless I have to. But if she keeps making false accusations, we may have no choice but to charge her. For now, I'll document everything for my report." The second officer gave a small smirk. "Trust me, Detective, word's already spreading. Half the block was recording. By tonight, her meltdown will be on every neighbor's phone, and by tomorrow? Probably the internet." He wasn't wrong. Karen thrived on attention, but not this kind of attention. She had wanted to stage herself as the hero of the neighborhood, catching a supposed criminal, saving the day, showing everyone her power. Instead, she'd been humiliated in front of her entire audience, and worse, she couldn't silence the evidence. Her neighbors had it all on video, her lies, her screaming, her disbelief when the badge came out. Once that footage hit group chats, Facebook pages, or YouTube channels, her iron grip over this community was going to slip fast. When the patrol cars finally rolled away, I leaned back against my truck for a moment, taking in the strange calm that followed the storm. A few neighbors lingered nearby, curiosity getting the better of them. One man in his 50s, wearing a fishing cap, came up and clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled that like a champ. She's been making our lives miserable for years. Fines for leaving a trash can out too long, letters about lawn heights, threats over paint colors, you name it, she's on it. But accusing someone of stealing her car? That's a new low, even for her." I offered a polite smile. "Thanks. I didn't move here looking for trouble, but trouble seems to have found me." The man laughed. "Welcome to the neighborhood. We've all been waiting for someone to stand up to her. Didn't think it'd be the new guy on day one." Another neighbor, a woman carrying a toddler on her hip, stepped closer. Her tone was quieter, but filled with relief. "She bullies everyone here. Most of us just put up with it because we don't want the drama. But the way you shut her down, you don't know how good that felt to watch." I nodded, listening, letting them vent. Inside, though, I was already thinking like a detective. Every word they spoke was more confirmation that this HOA wasn't just poorly managed, it was oppressive, maybe even corrupt. People feared Karen, not because she was powerful legally, but because she wielded intimidation like a weapon. And today, that weapon had backfired spectacularly. By the time I finished unloading the last box into the cabin, the sun was beginning to set, and the once bustling street was quiet again. Karen hadn't shown her face since her dramatic retreat. Her curtains were drawn tight, her house dark, like a fortress under siege. I knew she was inside, pacing, stewing, maybe calling her allies on the HOA board, maybe even drafting one of her infamous threatening letters. But whatever she was plotting, she couldn't undo what had already happened. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. A neighbor had already uploaded the video of the incident to a local community page. The caption read, "HOA president accuses new neighbor of stealing car, turns out he's a cop." I clicked it and watched the footage play out from the perspective of half a dozen phones. There she was, screaming at the top of her lungs, calling me a thief, demanding my arrest. There I was, calm and collected, pulling out the badge. And there was the crowd, gasping, laughing, and cheering when the truth came out. The comments were brutal. She finally crossed the line. How does this woman still have any authority? Karma at its finest. Some were even calling for her resignation as HOA president. Others were tagging local news pages, urging them to pick it up. In less than 2 hours, the video already had hundreds of shares. Karen's empire of control wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. For me, it was confirmation that my cover was still safe. To most people watching online, I was just the cop who moved in and stood up to Karen. They didn't know I was here for a deeper reason. They didn't know that every interaction, every word, every story about her and her board was part of a larger puzzle I was piecing together. And thanks to her little stunt, I had just earned the trust of the neighbors faster than I could have imagined. As the stars blinked on over the lake, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a rare smile. Sometimes in undercover work, you spend months trying to blend in, months waiting for someone to slip up. And sometimes, like today, the problem just walks straight to your front door, screaming at the top of its lungs. Karen didn't know it yet, but her reign as the neighborhood tyrant was coming to an end. And the best part? She'd written the ending herself. Every shout, every lie, every accusation had been her own undoing. She had tried to paint me as a criminal, but in the process, she'd exposed herself as a fraud. From that day on, every time I drove past her house in my truck, she wouldn't even look at me. She'd turn her head sharply, her pride still wounded, her power slipping more each time the neighbors laughed about the car theft that never was. For someone like her, humiliation was worse than punishment. And me? I just kept doing my job, watching, listening, gathering evidence. Because one thing was certain, Karen's false accusation wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning.